Good evening, Lester. Shares of U.S. automakers fell, but so did chip makers and other companies.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country, saying,
Today, with the stroke of a pen, President Donald Trump signed an executive order charging a 25%.
Huge automobile factories in Mexico's vast border regions have been in a state of suspense for days. On March 29, 2025, the Washington administration officially announced that it would impose an additional 25% tariff on cars imported from Mexico starting April 2nd, but this is very exciting. So we're signing an executive order today. That's gonna lead to tremendous growth in the automobile industry. This news rang alarm bells in the Mexican economy, which had already been on high alert against the Trump administration's trade moves. For several months, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum told the press on April 1, 2025, "We don't believe in an eye for an eye. A tooth for a tooth, we must always remain open to dialogue," and said that they are accelerating diplomatic efforts to mitigate the possible repercussions of these tariffs, which will take effect the next day on the country's economy. Mexico has been preparing for a troubled period in its trade relations with the U.S. for some time. The automotive sector is at the heart of this relationship. According to data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis 2024 and 2024, Mexico exported $182.3 billion worth of cars and parts to the U.S., employing nearly 1 million people. If the high tariffs go into effect, there are fears that production lines in the northern states could suffer a major contraction. Moreover, even though Sheinbaum argues for negotiation, not retaliation, public opinion has been pushing for tougher measures against the U.S., while some say let's impose high tariffs on American products. Sheinbaum tried to keep tensions relatively low by saying, in his April 1st speech, "It is not in Mexico's interest to fuel this conflict." There was another interesting development on the same day. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had a telephone conversation with Sheinbaum on April 1, 2025 following this call. The Canadian Prime Minister's office stated, "We must act with common sense to protect North America's competitiveness." According to the information obtained, Carney proposes that Mexico and Canada act together to bring the Washington administration to the negotiating table. This move had been on the agenda before, but the Trump administration showed that it did not prefer the collective negotiation structure of NAFTA, now USMCA, by saying we negotiate with each country separately. Now Canada and Mexico believe that the new tariffs will also target their economies and are seeking a joint diplomatic strategy. Sheinbaum's April 1st statement, "We are taking measures, but dialogue must continue," resonated widely with the Mexican public. While some consider this approach too soft, others argue that we are the most dependent on the U.S. market. If we suddenly close the doors, we will shoot ourselves despite these different voices. Sheinbaum reiterated that diplomatic channels remain open in the face of the Trump tariffs, which went into effect the following morning, April 2nd. Indeed, the White House spokesperson did not signal any retreat the same day, saying talks with the Mexican government are ongoing. But President Trump will not stop imposing the tariffs. Tension actually dates back to a few months ago. The Trump administration announced in early 2025 that it was planning additional tariffs on steel, aluminum, and semiconductors, and Mexico objected at the end of February, saying this step would harm the North American common market. However, the harshest move came in the automobile sector. The U.S. accuses Mexican vehicles of creating unfair competition through low-cost production. Mexico, on the other hand, argues that for years, we have had an integrated supply chain with the U.S. and Canada, and this sector benefits all three countries. The high tariffs, which came into effect on April 2nd, could seriously shake this integrated chain. Canada is known to have taken a similar stance. Prime Minister Carney said on April 1st, "We are ready to fight back against unfair trade practices. We believe that North America must act with one voice." But Canada's automotive exports to the U.S. are not as high as Mexico's. Still, there is significant dependence on steel, aluminum, and some agricultural products. If we develop a joint action plan, Washington will come to the table, Carney told Sheinbaum. Although the details of this plan are not yet clear, headlines in the Mexican press are beginning to appear, saying Ottawa and Mexico can stand side by side against U.S. tariffs. However, Mexico's situation is seen as much more critical. In 2024, nearly 70% of automotive exports were made to the U.S. market. This corresponds to a huge export revenue for Mexico. If taxes in the automotive sector rise to 25%, production lines in Mexico will face a heavy cost burden. Thousands of workers could lose their jobs. Our export volume would plummet, warned representatives of the Mexican Chamber of Commerce. This unilateral step is never right. But we are working on options to minimize the damage to Mexico, Sheinbaum said on April 1, 2025, adding that diplomatic negotiations are still a priority. So, what is the countermove that Sheinbaum envisages to be put in place? On April 3, according to rumors, the Mexican government is considering the gradual imposition of tariffs on certain agricultural products and electronics imported from the U.S. Alternative plans are also on the table, such as shifting the production of certain categories of automotive parts exported to the U.S. to other countries. However, Sheinbaum signed at the April 1st press conference that he did not want to launch a full-scale tariff war, saying instead of harsh retaliation, we should prioritize arrangements that protect our interests. However, if the White House's position does not change, Mexico may also be forced to toughen its policies. Public opinion also plays an important role in all this. Recent polls in Mexico show that 60% of the population thinks that we can boycott American goods in protest against these U.S. policies. Sheinbaum, who is known for his cool head, does not completely rule out this wave of emotional reaction, but believes that a breakdown in the diplomatic balance would bring greater risks. On the morning of April 1st, he said we must protect our sovereignty without sacrificing our economic stability. The way to do this is through dialogue, but also through a firm will, he said in a statement on the morning of April 1st, reflecting this dilemma if people boycott. Businesses will struggle even more, warned large companies operating in the border regions. Another important point is that the U.S. cited fentanyl and migration issues in making this decision. The Trump administration accuses Mexico of failing to adequately secure its border and is trying to justify the tariffs by citing the fentanyl crisis. Trying to solve global problems with a trade cudgel always ends badly, Sheinbaum said on April 1st. This view is shared by both Mexico and Canada. Nevertheless, the Trump administration intends to implement these policies without compromise in order to send a message of tough leadership to the domestic public and to protect its own manufacturing sector. As the April 2nd tariffs take effect, the question how will these price hikes affect the U.S. consumer is being asked in the American media. History experts point out that the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, is based on the principle of mutual benefit for the three countries. The USMCA, which was renewed in the 2020s, tried to maintain the same understanding. But the Trump administration's protectionist approach is again causing a storm. Mexico does not have the luxury of completely severing ties with the United States because it relies heavily on its northern neighbor for much of its export revenue. Canada is somewhat less affected by tariff wars, but Ottawa knows that a confrontation with the U.S. would shake the economic balance. For this reason, the theme of Carney and Sheinbaum's April 1st meeting was, weakening North America would benefit no one. We want to diversify production and strengthen ties with European and Asian markets, Sheinbaum told the Mexican press on the evening of the same day. This reflects Mexico's long-term goal of reducing dependence on the U.S., but such steps cannot happen overnight. The automotive sector is interwoven with giant companies and dozens of parts manufacturers that have long been integrated in their supply chains. A rupture could shake both Mexican factories and U.S. dealer and sales networks. So, while America's protectionist policy may hit Mexico in the short term, in the long run it could also hurt its own industrialists. Higher prices will reduce consumer demand, which could backfire on U.S. auto dealers. Some U.S. economists warned on the morning of April 2nd, as the tariffs went into effect, Mexican exporters began to face the new tax rates at customs gates. There was reportedly congestion at the border, and some freight forwarders were on standby. Sheinbaum's management is trying to calm the panic by saying one day will not end all our exports, and we are in talks with the U.S. However, there is growing concern in the business world that if a solution is not found quickly, we will lose our competitiveness. According to some experts, With such a tight trade integration between Mexico and the US, it is very difficult for tariffs to be permanent in the long term. Somehow a new compromise will have to be found, but it is unclear how long that process will take. Sheinbaum is likely to make a speech to the Mexican Congress on April 3, 2025, in which he will say our strategic moves are ready. We have the evidence to negotiate and explain to the public the countermeasures they have prepared. The content of this speech is not yet clear, but according to leaked information, additional tariffs on U.S. imports in certain sectors are being discussed. There could be retaliation on agricultural products, electronics, and even beverages. Nevertheless, Sheinbaum is likely to reiterate his April 1st stance, saying, "We don't want to be dragged into a bigger trade war. A tit-for-tat approach would aggravate the crisis." Sheinbaum is looking for a smart diplomatic solution. Mexican media commented, "So what do Americans, Canadians and Mexicans think about Trump's trade war? As President Donald Trump plans to put more economic pressure on Canada, Mexico, and several other countries to lay the groundwork for his Make America Great Again MAGA goals." The MAGA leader has changed his mind many times on the amount and start date of tariffs against his northern and southern neighbors, but now says that April 2nd will be Liberation Day. Now we dive into the heated reaction of the Canadians, the cool-headed approach of the Mexicans, and the divisions among Americans. In the midst of the burgeoning trade war, high prices keep coming to mind as the prospect of more tariffs and counter-tariffs looms. Inflation is now the #1 concern in 7 of the 29 countries in the monthly What Worries the World survey, including Canada and the US. Concern about the cost of living remained high month on month. In Canada, 48%, 1 point, and the US 43% by 1 point. Given that the details of Trump's plans continue to evolve, some may be taking a wait-and-see approach. In Mexico, inflation concerns rose more steeply in the wake of the tariff war, rising 5 points to 35% in 1 month. The economies of all 3 countries may stabilize, but for now people seem to be holding their breath. Mexicans are divided, with 51% saying the current economic situation in their country is good, versus 49% who say it is bad, and unchanged from month to month. The money mood in Canada has been and continues to be worse, with almost 3/4, 74% to points saying the national economic situation is bad. Same for the US, where 64%, 1 point, say the economic situation is bad, amid Trump's seemingly ever-evolving policies. Like Canada, Canadians are graceful and restrained until their habitat is threatened. At the beginning of 2025, 43% of Canadians said this 51st state thing shouldn't be taken seriously. But on January 20th, when Trump was sworn in and said, "We will squeeze foreign countries with tariffs and taxes to enrich our citizens," things changed. Canadians were no longer smiling. Polls in early February showed that 2/3, 67% of Canadians would avoid US-made products, and a similar proportion, 66%, would not travel to the US as long as Trump remains in office. Baby boomers in particular have made it clear that they will use their purchasing power as a weapon. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney called for early elections and has been publicly touted as the leader who will get the best deal for Canada. To garner support, he appeared in an ad with the famous Canadian comedian Mike Myers. The message was clear: elbows up. America's southern neighbor, Mexico, on the other hand, is pursuing a different strategy. Instead of escalating tensions, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has chosen to keep her cool. According to a poll conducted in Mexico in early February, almost 2/3 of the population, 64%, approve of Sheinbaum's position on the White House's policies. However, the same poll showed that 60% of Mexicans would boycott U.S. products if Trump's policies were implemented. Mexico has a more sensitive relationship with the U.S. than Canada. According to history professor Jaime Gutierrez, having problems with the U.S. is a much more critical issue for Mexico than for Canada. Sheinbaum's strategy seems to be paying off. He has twice won tariff suspensions after talks with Trump. Analysts believe that Sheinbaum's real success lies in quietly accepting U.S. demands on fentanyl distribution and migration. Mexico avoided tariffs by sending 10,000 troops to northern states extradited 29 cartel bosses to the U.S., and migrant encounters at the border dropped. At the same time, Sheinbaum is counter-mobilizing. By demanding a halt to the arms flow to the U.S., Sheinbaum is keeping the nationalist base in Mexico alive. While cooperating with the U.S., Sheinbaum knows how to talk to the Trump administration and send a message to his supporters in Mexico, says Karen Zis's editor and chief of KOE Online. Sheinbaum's approval rating has reached 85% in recent polls. He sets the agenda with his LA Mananera press conferences and enjoys media support. Sheinbaum's strategy is clear: cooperate but don't surrender. During his visit to Baja California, Sheinbaum summarized the 5 principles of his foreign policy: shared responsibility, mutual trust, respect for sovereignty, cooperation without submission, and respect for Mexico and Mexicans. Among Sheinbaum's priorities are the following: finding new trading partners. He has begun negotiations with automakers in the EU and Asia to reduce dependence on the U.S. market. Encouraging domestic production, incentives are on the agenda to reduce dependence on exports by increasing production in Mexico's domestic market. Continue negotiations with the U.S. Continuing talks with the White House and increasing diplomatic pressure to lower tax rates. Now let's turn to the U.S. side. The divided state of the Americans is particularly marked by the behavior of the MAGA, Make America Great Again leader. Since Trump's return to the presidency on January 20th, trade wars have rattled Wall Street and many Americans. The Republican president's job approval rating has held steady at 44%. 61% of Americans think the cost of living is heading in the wrong direction, and 57% see Trump's economic moves as disorganized. Support for the trade war largely varies by party affiliation. 84% of Democrats and only 24% of Republicans think that higher tariffs on imported goods would be harmful. 58% of Republicans, on the other hand, think the move is a good idea, even if it raises prices. 76% of Republicans think the U.S. is moving in the right direction, compared to 20% of Democrats. Trump says he doesn't foresee a recession, but he believes that economic challenges will eventually pay off for Americans. In conclusion, trade tensions between Mexico and the U.S. are not only affecting the economic relations between the two countries, but also the dynamics of global trade. Mexico's future strategy focuses on seeking new trade partnerships and promoting domestic production, reducing its dependence on the U.S. Claudia Sheinbaum is pursuing a strong strategy for economic independence while trying to ease U.S. tariff pressures through diplomatic negotiations. However, U.S. tariff policies could get tougher, especially in line with Trump's MAGA goals. This could further complicate global trade. Mexico can take important steps to consolidate its economy by strengthening its domestic market and diversifying its external trade relations. But standing up to U.S. tariffs is becoming a diplomatic chessboard. For Mexico, the U.S. approach could be to continue the trade war and apply more economic pressure. Over time, this strategy could also affect America's domestic economy, as the cost of trade wars could become a huge burden for U.S. people and businesses in the future. The relationship between Mexico and the U.S. could lead to different scenarios. If Mexico's strategic moves succeed, it would be an important step towards economic independence. But if the U.S. continues to increase tariffs, this could shake the balance of trade in the region and have repercussions for the global economy. What do you think about this? And how should Mexico respond to the U.S.'s tough stance? Will this escalation be a short-lived bargaining showdown, or will it permanently change trade dynamics in North America? For the moment, the answers are unclear. What is clear is that the cold winds blowing between the region's largest economies are affecting not only the automotive industry, but many other sectors and the livelihoods of millions of people. In the coming days, will Sheinbaum's approach of cool diplomacy prevail? Or will economic and political pressures push Mexico to retaliate even harder? Share your comments here and let us know what you think about this grand chess game. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like, because in the coming hours, perhaps any statement from North America has the power to change the course of the trade world, especially the possible Mexican response on April 3rd, and Washington's reaction afterwards could be a new turning point in the future of the entire continent. Let's see how this showdown will play out, and whether Mexico's emphasis on dialogue will be enough to prevent a fierce trade war. We will continue to watch together. Thank you for tuning in.